Good morning. This is a capital significant in American history. 5 years ago, the United States Capitol was attacked in an unprecedented breach that shook the nation. Join us as we remember the fifth anniversary of the U.S. Capitol attack. Good morning. It's up is commemoration of the January 6th assault on the U.S. Capitol. 5 years ago, supporters of then former President Donald Trump by 2020 presidential election results. The attack resulted in multiple deaths, injuries to law enforcement officers, and widespread damage to the historic building. It remains a defining moment in American political history. That former January 6 Select Committee Chairman Benny Thompson are hosting an unofficial hearing. The event features testimony from former law enforcement officers, state officials, and Americans who were eyewitnesses to the event. Um, and again, in the East Coast, leaders have noted that the event will explore issues surrounding pardons rendered to participants in the attack, as well as the broader impact of the event in American democracy. We are now just um, this morning hearings is will be held in the Capitol Visitor Center. As standing leaders say it aims to preserve the historical record, recognize those affected by attack, and raise awareness of continuing threats to free and fair election. This morning as well, President Trump is meeting with the House Republicans at the Kennedy Center. And,
Doug paid tribute to
Nafa,
colleague that we
and
who
was
has passed.
sorry for his passing.
Congressman Doug,
I'm sure the
leader.
This morning on this very solemn, important occasion. Before we begin, in light of the passing of Congressman Doug LaMarfa, a great member of Congress from the great state of California, we'd just like to ask for a moment of silence. Thank you. And thank you all for your presence here today on this solemn anniversary. 5 years ago today, a violent mob incited by Donald Trump attacked the Capitol as part of a concerted effort to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election and halt the peaceful transfer of power for the first time in American history. This bloodthirsty, treacherous mob brutally assaulted police officers and seriously injured more than 140 brave men and women of law enforcement. Many have suffered lasting physical and psychological damage. Several tragically lost their lives. Because of the extraordinary bravery of the U.S. Capitol Police, other law enforcement officials, and the resolve of the Congress to return that night, this unprecedented attack on our country and on our democracy failed. Over the last 5 years, instead of holding those responsible for the attack accountable, Donald Trump and far-right extremists the horrific events of January 6th. We will not let that happen. On the first day in office of his second term, instead of fulfilling his promise to lower the high cost of living on day one, Donald Trump pardoned hundreds of violent felons who brutally beat police officers while storming the United States Capitol. The criminals and thugs that Donald Trump pardoned have flooded communities across the country, unleashing violence and mayhem. The crimes committed by those rioters before and after the violent insurrection include child sexual assault, production of child pornography, possession of child pornography, rape, conspiracy to murder FBI agents, kidnapping, sexual assault, aggravated robbery, reckless homicide, driving under the influence causing death, illegal possession of firearms, domestic violence by strangulation, burglary, vandalism, grand theft, stalking, violation of protection. They refuse to serve as a check and balance on an increasingly out of control executive branch, preferring to be nothing more than a reckless rubber stamp for Donald Trump's extreme agenda. The January 6th violent attack on the Capitol that took place 5 years ago today was shameful then, it is shameful now, and and it will be shameful always and forever. We must continue to learn from what happened on January 6th in order to make sure that it never happens again. We must protect our free and fair elections. We must protect the peaceful transfer of power. We must protect the preeminence of the rule of law. And we must protect the eternal commitment to a democratic America, which remains the last best hope on earth. It is now my honor to yield to the distinguished gentleman from the great state of Mississippi, the once and future chair of the Homeland Security Committee and the chairman emeritus of the January 6th Select Committee, Congressman Benny Thompson.
Thank you so much, Leader Jeffries. And before I start with my opening comments, let me note, as we've already indicated, the passing of our colleague, Congressman Doug LaMarfa. Our thoughts are with his family and staff at this sad time. Good morning, and welcome to all who've joined us. I want to extend an especially warm welcome and thanks to the brave members of law enforcement who are joining us today. They protected us, they protected the Capitol, and they protected the democratic process. We can be here today because they were here then. Thank you. I'm also honored to rejoin my colleagues on the January 6th Select Committee, both on this panel and among our witnesses. 5 years ago today, an armed mob of thousands incited by President Donald Trump attacked, breached, and laid siege to the United States Capitol. They did so as Congress was carrying out one of its most fundamental constitutional duties, counting electoral votes, certifying a presidential election, and facilitating the peaceful transfer of power. What unfolded that day was both brutal and calculated. Officers were stabbed with metal fence stakes and bludgeoned with flagpoles. They were crushed in doorways until their ribs were broken. Eyes were gouged. At least one officer was dragged into the mob, beaten, tased, and left for dead. Others suffered lasting damage from concussions and traumatic brain injuries. In the days and weeks that followed, 5 police officers died due to the physical or psychological trauma they endured protecting Congress and the Constitution. The years may have muffled the screams we heard, and the horrible images of that day may have faded. So as we mark this grim anniversary, it's important that we remember exactly what happened. January 6th was not a regular tourist visit. It was not a day of love. It was a bloody riot that pushed our democracy to the breaking point. To bring us back to that day, we're going to play a short video reminding us that for a little over 3 hours, 5 years ago, this sacred temple of our democracy, where we are sitting today, was transformed into a war zone. I warn those watching that this video contained violence and strong language.
DC is a motherfucking war zone! Get you 12 up to help maintain the lines! Ammunitions and radio power. There's a people we lost the line. We've lost the line. I want to need 10 back. 10-33. I repeat, 1033 West front of the Capitol. We've been flanked and we've lost our order.
I was invited here by the president!
Some people want to rewrite the history of January 6th, to ignore what we saw with our own eyes. Some people want us to forget the lessons of that day, to pretend that we have overcome the threats facing our democracy and the rule of law. We will not allow that to happen. We gather to continue to uphold our oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to defend against the lawlessness of that day and the lawlessness we continue to see today. We gather because, in the words of Martin Luther King Jr., human progress is neither automatic or inevitable. Every step toward the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle. The tireless exertion and passionate concern of dedicated individuals. 5 years ago, police told us to remove the lapel pins that identify us as members of Congress, so we would be less likely to be attacked by the mob that was desecrating our Capitol. I did not take my pin off then, and I'm still wearing it today, because the work we do mattered then and continues to matter today. The rule of law and our oaths continue to matter, especially as we see Donald Trump pardon those who were charged or convicted in the January 6th attack, engage the military abroad while passing Congress, tears down the White House, shutter whole government agencies, order mass goons to round up and deport U.S. citizens, and unlawfully put his name on a memorial to a better man. The bipartisan January 6th Select Committee, which I was privileged to lead, was charged with uncovering the facts, circumstances, and causes of what happened on that awful day, and to ensure it never happens again. It was one part of ensuring our constitutional republic could withstand President Trump's repeated attacks, and it offers lessons for today. One such lesson was seeing how important it was for officials, most of them Republicans, to put their country over their party. They remembered their oath was to the Constitution and not to one man. And we need to remember that lesson today, because 5 years on, the danger has not dissipated. President Trump still refuses to acknowledge that he lost the 2020 election. Many who promoted or litigated his big lie have been rewarded with powerful positions. Dozens of nonpartisan career prosecutors and FBI agents who worked on January 6 cases have been summarily fired. State election officials who stood up to the Trump pressure campaign have been faced with threats and retaliation. The Department of Justice has become an instrument for retribution. The message is clear. Uphold the rule of law and you will be punished. Only loyalty to one man will be rewarded. Violence in service of Trump is above the law. Remembering January 6th is not an exercise in partisanship. It's an obligation to those who have sacrificed for this country and all those who will in the future. Democracy depends on the courage of those who will defend it and on our willingness to hold accountable those who wish to destroy it. Today's forum is another step toward the goal of justice, another way of honoring our oaths, another way of showing that our constitutional republic is bigger and stronger than its enemies or one man. This morning, we'll hear from some of those courageous defenders of American democracy. I look forward to their testimony and to the hard work of preserving the truth, upholding the rule of law, and giving us a roadmap to ensure what happened 5 years ago never happens again. Now, I'm happy to recognize my former Select Committee colleague and the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, the gentleman from Maryland, Jamie Raskin.
Well, thank you kindly, Chairman Thompson. Welcome to all of our witnesses. Welcome to all of the members who joined us. William Faulkner once said, "The past isn't dead, it isn't even past." But Speaker Johnson would love to kill the past, indeed, the very recent past. Republicans today are observing this solemn anniversary by doing exactly nothing. They've even refused to hang up the plaque which a bipartisan congressional majority voted to put up to honor the officers who defended the Capitol and the peaceful transfer of power and the vice president on J6. So it's been 5 years since January 6th. It's been 3 years since that plaque was supposed to be put up, but they still haven't put it up. It took them 24 hours to put up a new plaque allegedly changing the name of the Kennedy Center to the Trump Kennedy Center. 24 hours, and that was illegal. That's like graffiti that was put up on the Kennedy Center building. They have a legal requirement to put it up, and I call on Speaker Johnson to put it up today. It's gathering dust in a closet somewhere. Thank you, Leader Jeffries. Thank you, Chairman Thompson, for not surrendering to the Orwellian project of forgetting, but rather insisting that we remember. Long after we are all gone, future generations will speak the names of Hodges and Dunn, Gunnell and Fanone, Sicknick and Pingen. They will be remembered as the great patriots that they are, and the people who smashed them in the face with Confederate battle flags and Trump flags, the people who tried to destroy our constitutional order, will be remembered as fascist traitors to their own country. So, we must remember 3 rings of sedition that took place on J6, the realm of the coup, the realm of the insurrection, and the realm of the mob violence. The coup was anchored in months of the big lie. Trump claimed to have won an election. He lost by more than 7 million votes, 306 to 232 in the Electoral College. He needed to get MAGA followers to simply disregard reality and facts and dismiss more than 60 federal and state court decisions that had rejected every claim of electoral fraud and corruption that they advanced in courtrooms across the land. This was critical because the president understood that lies would be the fuel for violence. As Voltaire said, anyone who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. Well, the coup depended also on coercive pressure campaigns, trying to force state election officials to just find me 11,780 votes. Coercive pressure campaigns to get DOJ to endorse the false claims. Just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman. The recruitment of counterfeit electors. The plot to bully Pence into rejecting electoral college votes from swing states and either just declare Trump president or kick the whole thing into a contingent election in the House. So that was the coup part of the operation. The second layer out, the realm of the insurrection, was the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, the Three Percenters, the muscle. And these were the white supremacist, violent groups, white Christian nationalist groups that had trained for weeks or months to get ready, staging confrontations at state capitals as dress rehearsals for what was to happen. The Proud Boys came to D.C. twice in the lead up to J6 and provoked brawls with anyone that they would describe as Antifa. They organized in military fashion, and they were dead set on attacking the police, storming the Capitol, and stopping the steal. So as ferocious and violent as the organized insurrectionists of maybe 600 or 700 were, they could not have succeeded without that third tier of sedition, the mob itself, the mob riot. After Trump convinced the organizers to change the date of their rally from January 20th, Inauguration Day, to January 6th, the electoral count day, he then went on social media to recruit tens of thousands of mob extras to back up the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers who would get the fight against the police started. And you know, Trump kicked it off with the famous tweet saying, "Be there, we'll be wild," which set the MAGA Twitterverse on fire. Well, it all culminated, of course, with his speech on the ellipse where he said, "You got to go and fight like hell, and if you don't, you won't have a country anymore." So the attempted coup, the insurrection, the mob violence converged and exploded on J6. Today, we analyze the shocking resurgence of political violence in this century, its relationship to propaganda, misinformation, and disinformation, and the threat that it poses to American constitutional government. We honor the heroes who helped us to defeat this attack on our democracy. We also recognize today that the political violence unleashed by Trump did not end on J6. On his first day back in office last year, he pardoned nearly 1,600 of the rioters and insurrectionists, including hundreds who violated police officers, including several in this room. Those pardons were raw spoils shared indiscriminately without regard to their actual offenses, their criminal sentences, their prior records, their contrition, their repentance, or their reform and rehabilitation. They were essentially a payoff to Trump's private militia, which is now ready to stand back and stand by again for future engagements. We could play this video.
I believe that by Donald Trump pardoning me, he's going to be pardoning good men.
As one of Donald Trump's first acts back in office,
approximately 1,500 for a pardon, full pardon.
He pardoned criminals who attacked the Capitol on January 6th.
So this is January 6th. These are the hostages.
Convicts who beat and battered police officers.
DC is a motherfucking war zone!
Full pardon.
These are the criminals he released back into our communities. Home invaders, burglars, sex offenders, people who continued plotting violence against their political opponents, set free by Donald Trump to terrorize their neighbors.
We hope they come out tonight, frankly.
They pose a serious threat to public safety. As we show in a report released by House Judiciary Dems this week, at least 33 pardoned insurrectionists have since committed additional crimes since January 6th, including child sexual assault, terroristic threats, domestic violence, and conspiracy to murder FBI agents. And yet, Trump indiscriminately pardoned all of them. When you reward and normalize criminal behavior, of course, you invite more of it. And the president didn't just free his rioters for doing his dirty work, he punished law enforcement for doing their jobs, purging hundreds of career FBI agents and prosecutors just because they worked on J6. He installed actual participants in the attack in the Department of Justice itself. The new U.S. pardon attorney, Ed Martin, tweeted from the Capitol grounds on this day 5 years ago and described the mayhem as Mardi Gras in D.C. His senior counselor at the Department of Justice, Jared Wise, is another J6 defendant captured on body camera footage yelling, "Kill him," 5 different times as police were being attacked right next to him. These leaders at the Department of Justice today have never once regretted their participation in this nightmare. With election deniers and J6 conspiracists Pam Bondi and Kash Patel at the top of the DOJ, it's like the Joker and the Riddler and the Penguin have taken over Gotham City. So I close with the thought that it is still January 6th in America, and it will be until the forces of strong, nonviolent democracy prevail. We are still in the fight of our lives, my friends. And now I want to introduce our witnesses for the first panel. First, we have Officer Winston Pingen, who is a former Capitol Police officer who defended the Capitol and all of us on J6 2021. He was stationed on the West Front, the scene of the most brutal violence that day. He was punched in the face, knocked on his back, and had his baton ripped from his hands by rioters. The men who attacked him have been pardoned and celebrated as heroes. Next, we have Brendan Ballou, a former federal prosecutor at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C., who spent 2 years prosecuting J6 rioters and resigned 3 days after Trump pardoned them. Mr. Ballou has described Trump's pardons as part of an authoritarian playbook. Next, we have Mary McCord, the executive director of the Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection at Georgetown Law School, who spent nearly 20 years as a federal prosecutor and rose to become acting assistant AG for national security. She was among the first to sound the alarm in 2020 that Trump's lies were whipping his diehard MAGA supporters into a frenzy. Her warnings were prescient. Finally, we have Pamela Hemphill, who has traveled to us from Idaho. She is a 72-year-old Idaho woman, formerly known as the MAGA Granny, who, unlike nearly all the other 1,600 J6 defendants, formally rejected President Trump's pardon. Ms. Hemphill was once a true believer who pushed past police lines because she believed in Trump's lies. She pleaded guilty and served her time and has steadfastly pushed back against attempts by Donald Trump and his allies to rewrite and whitewash the history of what happened on January 6th. I'm so eager to hear from all four of our witnesses, and I'm thrilled that you decided to join us today. Thank you for being here. And Mr. Pingen, we can go ahead and start with you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Raskin. I will now recognize our witnesses each for 3 minutes to provide summaries of their testimony. Their full written remarks will be submitted for the record. Officer Pingen, you're recognized.
Thank you all for the opportunity to testify and be here today. I was just a kid who had a dream of becoming a police officer and was lucky enough that it came true here with the Capitol Police. 5 years ago today, I was called a traitor, violently assaulted in the line of duty, punched in the face, pepper sprayed, and thought, I'm going to die here on the steps of the U.S. Capitol. My name is Winston Pingen, and I was an officer with the Capitol Police for over 5 years. I do not speak on behalf of all officers, nor the department, which I left 10 months later, but I believe my experience is not unique as one of many who showed up to work on January 6th like I did every day, ready to protect and serve the Congress, the congressional community, and the Capitol itself. Serving as an officer was the honor of my life, especially with the ceremonial unit honoring the inauguration of President Biden, as well as the lying in state ceremonies of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Officer Brian Sicknick, and Officer William Evans. I would be remiss to not mention honoring the life and service of Officer Howie Liebengood, who sadly took his own life just days after January 6th, 2021. On that day, I was assigned to the Civil Disturbance Unit, the Hard Gear Riot Team, on the West Front as thousands descended upon the Capitol from Pennsylvania Avenue. Before I knew it, we were completely overrun, and what started with mere insults turned into being brutally attacked. This should serve as no surprise to anyone. The evidence of violence is obvious and extensive. Hundreds of police officers, my friends, fought valiantly to defend the Capitol and our democratic process that day. From the West Front to inside the Capitol, the mob said to me, President Trump sent us, and we don't want to hurt you, but we will. While I suffered immensely on and because of January 6th, I do not wish to dwell on my own pain and want to be clear this is not about me or any one person here today. The events of that day are bigger than any of us. What happened that day is wrong. It should go without saying. Pardoning criminals who severely beat me and my fellow officers that day is completely unacceptable. We cannot accept violent felons being pardoned and released back into our neighborhoods without consequence. That is not justice. Violence is never acceptable. It must be unequivocally condemned by the president and our fellow Americans, not selectively ignored or pardoned. I implore America to not forget what happened on January 6th. We must refuse to accept the normalization of violence. In this deeply divided time, I believe the vast majority of Americans have so much more in common than what separates us. And finally, to all the officers who continue to show up day in and day out in service to Congress and to our nation, thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll now recognize Mr. Blau.
Thank you. My name is Brennan Ballou, and for 2 years I was on the team that prosecuted rioters who attacked the Capitol on January 6th. I should make clear that I was a very small part of a very large team, but because I'm in a position to speak publicly, I will. Let me start not with January 6th, but with January 20th, 2025, when President Trump pardoned over 1,500 rioters. Now, here I confess my own ignorance. I believed, if nothing else than out of pure political self-interest, President Trump would not pardon those rioters who attacked and tried to kill police officers. I was wrong. In fact, the president pardoned rioters who attacked officers with pipes, flagpoles, bear spray, and whips, who dragged officers into the crowd, tased them, and tried to gouge out their eyes. He even pardoned rioters who had previously been convicted, as you noted, of manslaughter and charged with production of child pornography. And when his first pardon was insufficient, he re-pardoned one defendant on an unrelated gun charge to set him free. After the pardons, like several of my colleagues, I chose to resign from the Justice Department. But since then, President Trump has continued to try to rewrite the history of January 6th. He's fired or demoted career FBI agents and prosecutors, my former colleagues who investigated and prosecuted rioters. He appointed an election denier, Ed Martin, to be interim U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, and appointed a literal rioter, Jared Weiss, to a senior Department of Justice job. His appointees have tried to erase the public records of the attack on government websites, and to create a false equivalence, have used many of the same charging statutes used against rioters against the president's political opponents, Congresswoman LaMonica McKibber, for instance, and protesters in Los Angeles and D.C. And I'll note that many of those charges have since been reduced or dropped entirely. Why has the president continued to focus on erasing the history of January 6th? I believe it's because he knows that if he can convince Americans to forget the attack on the Capitol, then he can convince us to attack any attack on democracy, no matter how violent. And if that happens, if January 6th is forgotten, or worse yet, excused as legitimate political discourse, then January 6th and attacks like it, more violent, will certainly happen again. So what can be done? To protect the future of our democracy, we have to preserve our past. Memorials like this event matter, and so too do symbols. As some of you have noted, in 2022, Congress passed a law to install a plaque to honor the officers who defended the Capitol that day and required that it be installed within a year. That deadline was nearly 3 years ago, and though the plaque has been made, the Speaker of the House reportedly refuses to install it. Two officers, Harry Dunn and Daniel Hodges, who are here today, both of whom protected the Capitol on January 6th, have sued to have the memorial installed, and we will soon see if the Speaker and his subordinate offices will be compelled to follow the law. But we can do more than lawsuits. For people who want to honor the memory of January 6th, there is much that they can do. Keep talking about the day. Keep writing about it. Develop school curricula. Archive the history of the attack. Have your local government annually memorialize the history of the attack. The fight over the past is ultimately a fight over the future, and there is a role for all of us to play. In a world where so many politicians' political careers depend on forgetting, simply remembering the past is an act of resistance. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Professor McCord, you're recognized.
Thank you for inviting me to speak about political violence today. To learn from January 6, we must understand both that mis- and disinformation are the primary drivers of political violence, and that political violence is not limited to physical attacks, including killings, but also includes the threats, intimidation, and harassment that squelch civic participation and undermine the functioning of our democratic republic. In the years leading up to January 6, conspiracy theories emboldened extremists. The Great Replacement Theory, which posits a conspiracy to replace majority white populations with non-white immigrants, was behind the deadly Unite the Right rally and multiple mass shootings. Conspiracies about Democrats taking away Americans' freedoms were behind attacks on state houses during the pandemic. And by Election Day 2020, President Trump's election fraud conspiracy was well seated in the populace, so that by January 6th, the thousands of people he had summoned to the Capitol were ready and willing to act when he called for them to fight like hell. President Trump's pardons cannot erase what happened on January 6th. His revisionist history is based on more falsehoods: that January 6th was a peaceful protest, that the January 6th defendants were politically persecuted, and that Trump himself was the victim of a weaponized Department of Justice made up of evil people. Add to this the baseless claims of non-citizen voting and pervasive violent crime by immigrants, and the risk of political violence increases despite polls that show that most Americans are firmly against it. Political violence does not have to be physical to cause great damage. Threats against election officials have resulted in the highest recorded rate of turnover in the past quarter century. Elected officials at every level have decided not to run for re-election after threats to themselves and their families. And new research shows that roughly 5.5 million Americans may have not voted in 2024 because of fears of violence. Executive actions in the last year have created a culture of fear and intimidation. The blacklisting of law firms has chilled lawyers from representing people and causes the president opposes. The demands for prosecution of the president's perceived enemies signals that those who challenge him will be punished. The targeting of media organizations risks burying stories about government overreach and failing to fact-check false and misleading statements by government officials. And NSPM 7, the one-sided presidential proclamation directing the federal government to go after those the president characterizes as espousing anti-Americanism, has impacted the crucial work of nonprofits fearful of being subjected to baseless investigations and audits. And there is state-sponsored physical violence as well. ICE and CBP have physically assaulted individuals suspected of being undocumented, as well as protesters, university students, and clergy members, all to instill fear in immigrant communities and to chill First Amendment protected protest. And the federalization and deployment of the National Guard into so-called blue cities attempts to normalize the militarization of the country. We cannot afford to ignore the false narratives that this administration seeks to rely on to suppress voting rights and public protest. Congress has used its authorities to combat disinformation and political violence, whether by private actors or government officials, and Americans must refuse to be silenced or chilled from civic participation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Ms. Hemphill, you're recognized.
Thank you. My name is Pam Hemphill. I'm a mother and a grandmother and a cancer survivor and a retired addiction counselor. I am also a convicted criminal for what I did on January the 6th, 2021. Thank you for having me back to the Capitol today. I am deeply grateful for this chance to try to make amends and talk about what happened 5 years ago. Once I got away from the mega cult and started educating myself about January the 6th, I knew what I did was wrong. I pleaded guilty to my crimes because I did the crime. I received due process, and the DOJ was not weaponized against me. When Donald Trump pardoned us, I rejected the pardon accepting that pardon would be lying about what happened on January the 6th. I am guilty, and I own that guilt. 5 years ago, I traveled from Idaho to D.C. to see Donald Trump speak. I had fallen for the president's lies, just like many of his supporters. Local people had welcomed me into the circle when I was around them. I heard them saying things like, the Democrats are trying to turn us into a communist country, or the radical left wants to do away with our Constitution. The gaslighting caused a lot of fear, and I was scared. With that fear in my heart, I came here on January the 6th. I went from Trump's speech to the Capitol because I thought Mr. Trump would go to the Capitol with us. I heard people saying that Trump was going to walk down to the Capitol, so I went. Well, as you know, Donald Trump never showed. But the rioters did, and the attack began. The police officers were the heroes. They protected the Capitol and everyone inside the Capitol, and even people like me. I was trampled on by the rioters. And if it weren't for the Capitol Police helping me that day, I might have died. To the Capitol Police officers sitting, if I may address you for a minute. I am truly sorry from the bottom of my heart for being part of the mob that put you and so many officers in danger. I want the Capitol Police to know how truly grateful I am to them and how deeply sorry I am. I can't believe people are still disrespecting you and trying to lie about January the 6th. I will do everything I can to stop the lies about our brave officers like you who protected us during the attack. Speaking about January the 6th has caused a great risk to my personal safety. I have been doxxed online, harassed, and physically assaulted. But I am here, and I don't care. I won't let it stop me. I can't sit here while Mr. Trump and others are lying. I also want others who feel like me to know that we must stop the lies being pushed by the Republican leaders and Trump himself. Thank you again for having me here. I am glad for the opportunity to speak to you and answer any of your questions.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I'd like to thank our witnesses in total for their powerful testimony. Officer Prejean, thank you for your service. One thing we've heard from the MAGA folks is that January 6th was just a normal tourist visit at the Capitol. Nothing but some protesters who got too rowdy. I'd like to begin by asking this panel, based on what you know of January 6th, from being there to prosecuting to studying it, do you agree with that statement? And what would you say to those who would downplay what happened that day 5 years ago? And Officer President, we'll start with you, and we'll go down the line.
Thank you. I would absolutely not agree. That statement that it was a normal tourist visit is completely false. I spent over 5 years at the Capitol dealing with many actual normal tourist day visits, and this was not one at all. It is offensive to me, and I'm sure to many of my fellow officers, to hear it so diminished when we make sacrifices day in and day out and over the years in service to Congress, and that includes working around the clock, missing holidays and family events, and to have it be so whitewashed and so diminished is incredibly offensive. And to those who say that, I wish they would actually listen to what we are saying here today and actually talk to officers like myself who experienced firsthand brutal violence that day.
Thank you so much. Mr. Ballou?
For those who question whether January 6th was a day of violence, they should just look at the tape. This was the most documented crime in American history, and it's obvious what happened there. In terms of what the experience was like for those who were there, in the course of being part of the teams that investigated and prosecuted rioters, we had the opportunity to talk to many U.S. Capitol Police and Metropolitan Police Department officers. If you talk to most officers, they're pretty stoic folks. The number of officers that we had that candidly broke down crying in our office, still processing the horror of that day, is something that's very hard to forget. And I think that pain is evidence alone of how violent that day was.
Professor?
Yes, the video shown this morning makes clear this was not a normal day of peaceful protest. I've never seen tourists break through windows and come in the second floor or scale the walls of the Capitol in my nearly 40 years in Washington, D.C. But I would also say this is dangerous because these lies about January 6th cause more conspiracy theories. The theory that it was a Fedsurrection, not an insurrection. In other words, that it was actually put on by federal government and had federal agents who were actually agitating the protests. The idea that the new charges against the person who allegedly planted the pipe bombs is a cover-up for some scheme that a Capitol Police officer planted those pipe bombs. These are dangerous conspiracy theories that will continue to provoke political violence. And the theory that those who were pardoned are victims and who they are owed something, reparations, other types of rewards for their victimization, seeds even more of that. So no, Mr. Chairman, I disagree very much with the rhetoric.
Thank you so much. Ms. Hemphill?
Thank you for the question. You can't gaslight me. I was there. I saw what you did. I saw the officers being pepper sprayed. When I was on the steps, I watched one of them fall down and hit his head and his back. So don't be telling me it wasn't violent. Don't come to me with that ever again. I watched you. I was on the east side. But I saw what you did.
Thank you so much. I now recognize other members for question as we identified. Mr. Swalwell, you recognize.
Thank you. Since the Civil War, the three most important days in American history are December 7, 1941, September 11, and January 6. And we don't need the years for the last two because we know what happened. They aren't dates on the calendar, they're scar tissue. And as you just said, Ms. Hemphill, we saw them unfold live and in terrifying detail with our own eyes. But 5 years later, Donald Trump has pardoned the insurrectionists. The steps have been cleaned, the broken glass has been repaired, and because the 22nd Amendment says he can't run again, maybe we exhale. If this country had one word that defined its march higher, it wouldn't be liberty or justice, it would be next. Because we have a tendency to just move on so quickly from the tragedies that define us. We have a tendency to not look back, but I can't do that. I'm the son of a cop, the brother of cops, a former prosecutor who stood up in a courtroom defending the idea of the people. But you don't need a badge on your chest to know that January 6th was a moral crater. You don't need a law degree on your wall to know that in a country like ours, we don't tolerate violence. You don't choose the criminal over the constable. What Trump is attempting to do is to gaslight a nation on an industrial scale. It's the same playbook the fringe theorists used after September 11. They told us there were no planes. They told us it was holograms, missiles, a controlled demolition. We didn't buy that nonsense then, and we cannot whitewash history now. Ms. McCord, I was hoping you'd engage in a hypothetical with me and put aside the politics. Picture George Bush. Remember him standing on the pile of twisted steel at Ground Zero, his arm around a retired firefighter, holding that bullhorn. He bucked us up. He gave us a spine when ours was fractured. Now, imagine if he had been the one to incite the attacks. Imagine if he had held a rally in Battery Park 10 minutes before impact. Imagine if he had pointed at the towers and told a seething, armed crowd to fight like hell, to stop the steal, and make them do the right thing. Could January 6th have happened if Donald Trump had not called to assemble the mob?
I think that it could not, Representative Swalwell, and I think Jack Smith's testimony during his deposition recently makes that very clear. The evidence amassed about what Donald Trump knew, how many people, Republicans included, had told him there was no fraud in the election that's significant enough to change the results. His own attorney general had told them that. He called the crowd knowing that they responded to his dog whistles. And when he knew there was violence, when he knew that his own vice president was in danger, dire danger, that the mob had erected a gallows and said, hang Mike Pence, he let things continue and continued to let things continue. And according to Jack Smith's testimony the other day and the indictments, even the night after, the night of January 6th, he was still agitated. And we know that because 5 years later, he continues to propound those lies. I don't think, just for the record, George W. Bush would have ever said anything like that. Whatever policy disagreements those in this room may have with him, he is a man of integrity who would have never done such a thing.
Agreed. And on January 6th, what you just described is what happened. That's reality. It's important that we tackle the future. More than ever, it's coming at us at a breathtaking speed. But if we don't acknowledge a past wound, it stays poisoned. If we don't right these wrongs, we don't just get a repeat of January 6th, we get January 7th and 8th. And the country we are barely holding on to now will slip forever through our fingers. It doesn't matter who you voted for. Our job, our civic sacrament, is to reject the comforting lie, even when it comes from our friends, as Pamela Hemphill has told us. So we remember, we don't look away. We treat the day with the same reverence, the same sorrow, and the same resolve as the day the towers fell, because the moment we forget is the moment we, as a country, also fall. And I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Time has expired. We now recognize for 3 minutes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hemphill, thank you so much for joining us today. Pardons are supposed to be reserved for people who are contrite, who are repentant, who have paid their debt to society and are reformed and are no longer dangerous to society. On those standards, you may be the only one of the J6 insurrectionists who actually deserves a pardon, and yet they all got pardons and accepted them. You were granted a pardon as part of the en masse action, but you decided not to take it. Can you just elaborate a little bit further why you decided not to take the removal of the criminal record?
Thank you for the question. I do not deserve a pardon for what I did on January the 6th. I deserve to finish my sentence. I broke the law. To me, taking a pardon would be a slap in the Capitol Police's face. It was wrong that day. And you don't take a pardon for when you broke the law. No, ever. I'm sorry, I just get so angry.
Well, I want to, I was not aware, we've spoken before on the phone, but I was not aware that you had suffered harassment and that people were attacking you in the wake of your announcement. I wonder if you would just say a further word about that.
Attacking me on January the 6th or recently?
No, I mean, in the wake of not accepting the pardon, that there was a backlash against you, that you were...
Oh, yeah. They find out you support me, they come after you. It's that bad. I don't care. I'm going to keep speaking out.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And Ms. McCord, but how would you describe how the methodology and the history of these pardons differs from the history of pardons generally?
How much time do we have? So the pardon attorney is an office within the Department of Justice that normally reviews the applications for pardons, and they look at things like the person's criminal record, their individual characteristics, the things you already mentioned, right? What is their contrition? What have they done with their lives since they committed their crimes? And all of these things are taken into consideration, and recommendations are being made to the president. Here, so far as I can tell, the pardon attorney was completely sidelined, and there was no individualized assessment about the criminal records of those that were going to be pardoned. Criminal records before January 6th, their indications of dangerousness, whether they had accepted responsibility, it was just en masse. So it is as far removed from anything that I've ever seen. The closest is the pardons of draft defectors after Vietnam. Very, very, very different situation.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the young lady from Washington for 3 minutes, Ms. Jayapal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Leader Jeffries, for holding this very important hearing. Mr. Panjone, I want to just start by saying thank you so much from all of us who were here. We deeply appreciate your bravery, your sacrifice, and that of all the law enforcement officers who protected us and protected the Capitol that day. Ms. Hemphill, I want to thank you for your very honest and moving testimony, and I hope that it inspires others across the country to do and say what you have said. I think it's incredibly important. And I want to focus my few minutes on the toll on our democracy with Mr. Ballou and Ms. McCord. When I questioned Jack Smith recently, Special Counsel Jack Smith recently, about the toll on our democracy if we do not hold those who try to steal an election accountable, he described it as catastrophic. Mr. Ballou, can you talk about the effects of these pardons, not only on January 6th defendants' actions going forward, but on Trump supporters more generally?
Yeah, I think that there are two concerns here with the January 6th pardons specifically. You know, with the mass pardons of January 6th rioters, particularly the violent ones, I think the clear message here, probably the intent and certainly the effect of the pardons, was to empower a group of people who were loyal to the president, willing to enact violence in his name, but quite literally beyond the reach of the law. Immediately after the pardons came out, a number of rioters made statements saying that they were going to get retribution or revenge. Some said that they were going to immediately buy guns. It's clear what the effect of being told that the law doesn't apply to them is having on these rioters. But I also think that the January 6th pardons fit into a broader narrative of what's going on with this administration, that if people are sufficiently loyal and willing to support the president, either in words or financially, they will be put beyond the reach of the law. You look at the extraordinary donations, for instance, to the Trump Inaugural Committee, people giving $1 million to have their SEC or CFPB investigations dropped or their criminal prosecutions dropped. I think it means that, quite literally, for a certain group of people right now in America, the law does not apply to them.
Ms. McCord, I want to ask you what this does for public safety. I'm deeply concerned that the total lack of accountability here puts our country at risk of another January 6th or something much, much worse. Do you believe that we can deter future insurrections like what happened 5 years ago when the president has pardoned all of these people?
I think that there's the damage to sort of the even-handed administration of justice is really very strong. And people can think rationally right now that if what they do is at the behest of someone like Donald Trump, who has the power to absolve them from the wrongs that they commit, that there is an incentive to continue to commit those wrongs. And we are in a dangerous place right now where Mr. Trump still has 3 more years left of his term and is even talking about things like a third term, which of course would violate the Constitution. So these are all seeding these narratives already now that I think could prompt additional acts of violence. I don't think this Capitol could be attacked the way it was before because of what has happened since January 6th, but that does not mean that there can't be other, similar acts of violence elsewhere.
Thank you all so much. I yield back, Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from California for 3 minutes, Mr. Correa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to thank our witnesses for your bravery for being here today, testify to make sure we don't forget January 6th. If I can turn to Ms. Hemphill, ma'am, thank you also for being here. If I can ask you some very quick questions. Do you believe in God?
Thank you for the question. Absolutely.
Are you a God-fearing person?
Yes.
Why did you come to Washington on January 6th?
I believe that the election had been stolen.
So you believe the lies that the 2020 election had been stolen?
Absolutely.
Were you involved in politics before that?
No.
So you're not a person involved in this process?
No, sir.
You pled guilty to a crime committed on January 6th. Why did you plead guilty?
Because I was guilty.
You came to fight to stop steal, and you pled guilty. Did you realize that the 2020 election was not stolen?
At the time I pleaded guilty.
Did you serve time in jail?
Yeah, 60 days in prison.
And you refused Donald Trump's pardon. Why?
Because it was a lie. January 6th was an insurrection. I broke the law.
Police officers were being assaulted that day, were getting beat up. I know, I was there. I watched. I felt it. Yet these police officers also came to your rescue?
Yeah, the crowd had knocked me down in front of another officer and stepped on my head, pulled my shoulder, cut my knee, and broke my glasses. I was not breathing. If it hadn't been for the Capitol police officers, I would have died.
So these same police officers that were assaulted also saved your life, despite you being one of the rioters.
They saved those inside the Capitol and even rioters like myself.
What would you say to people watching this today about what's going on in the country? What would you say to them today about whitewashing, about forgetting what happened January 6th?
It's wrong. I point the finger, everything, to Trump.
So it really happened. This was an assault on our democracy, on our Capitol.
Absolutely orchestrated by Trump.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Gentleman's time has expired. We now recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your heading up this panel, which Speaker Emeritus Pelosi appointed, which needed to be done, and it was important, and this day is important too, because we should never forget this day. This, like Pearl Harbor, is a day that will live in infamy, an attack on our country by a man who had been president and was again president. Mr. Blue, as I understand it, you resigned from your position with the Justice Department. How many years had you worked at Justice?
6 years.
And why did you resign?
Well, it became clear what the president was going to do to the Department of Justice, and then it was a question about whether you could be most effective at resisting sort of the illegal actions, or at least unjustified actions, that the president seemed to be pursuing, whether you could do so most effectively inside or outside of government. It became clear to me that given that this administration was so willing to fire people that opposed it, that there was very little point, as I saw it, to staying in government, and instead I would be most effective outside.
Many of the people in Justice Department who engaged in the prosecutions were fired or dismissed. What damage has that done to the Department of Justice?
It's extraordinary in two ways. The first is just on the level of expertise, that there were senior level prosecutors, ones who were running the Capitol Siege section, the team that prosecuted rioters, who were demoted to entry level jobs, borderline clerical jobs. You simply lost the muscle memory of experienced prosecutors in the office because of those demotions and firings. I think at a broader level, independent of the expertise, the department is hemorrhaging credibility with judges, with juries, and with grand juries. And the only tool that the Department of Justice has is its credibility, the ability to convince people to accept its position. And it is rapidly losing that power.
The president has gone after quite a few people on this panel who were on the January 6th committee. Mr. Schiff, who's here, Senator Schiff, he's been targeted for the same kind of situations as the former FBI director and the New York prosecutor. Grand juries refused to indict a couple of people there. I know that this expression, the ham sandwich, how rare is it that a grand jury stands up to the government and says, no, we will not indict?
You know, and these are approximate statistics, but I think for the most recent year that data was available, it was something on the order of 6 no bills out of 130,000 attempted indictments. So, you know, at the DC U.S. Attorney's Office, where this has happened, I think at least a half dozen times, you're talking about, 6 to 130th to the 6th power, so extremely rare.
Well, it's good that the citizenry that serve on the grand juries have got more understanding and more backbone than most of our Republican colleagues, unfortunately. We must never forget this day, and I won't. I was in the gallery. I was concerned. Capitol Police came up in the gallery, locked the doors, had their guns ready, helped me with my gas hood, which I couldn't put on, and all experience, and got out of there. But I was certainly frightened, and I don't think I had post-traumatic stress disorder, but I've thought about it a lot. And when I sit in my house now and watch television, I lower a shade next to me at night so nobody can see in. Thank you. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. Thank you so much. Chair now recognizes a gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much to Leader Jeffries and to you, Mr. Chairman, and the folks who served on the January 6th committee for making sure that we never, ever, ever forget. And I think if we didn't have this president and this speaker, this hearing wouldn't be just a Democratic hearing. We would be remembering together the collective trauma that this country has gone through. Mr. Ballou, I want to talk a little bit about how the pardons and some of the effects of the pardons have re-traumatized victims. One of the things that we don't talk about with the pardons is that the fact that the insurrectionists who were convicted owed $3 million in restitution to Capitol police officers and others who they had injured on that day. And only about 15% of that amount, $400,000, was paid before President Trump liquidated the rest of
You're still following Capitol Politics Special Report, January Capitol attack 5 years later. I'm Ethan Vargas. We have just having some technical difficulties for a while. So we're gonna return to our special coverage of the hearings, the Democratic hearings. We're just having some technical difficulties I'm gonna return for a while. We'll be right back.
And by showing up. This is a very emotional room. It's been. Ms. Hemphill said that she received due process. Is that true?
Thank you for the question. Absolutely.
Yes. And so, Mr. Balu, you resigned from the Department of Justice. Would you agree that Ms. Hemphill and many others, all of the other 1,500 cases that were prosecuted, did they all receive due process?
Absolutely. I think it was the largest prosecution in American history, and it was extraordinary to watch, sort of more senior prosecutors, the care and attention they brought to every case.
I would agree with that. In fact, I think it's probably an example of how due process actually can and should work in this country, if only all of us were afforded it. Mr. Balu, I want to ask you a couple of additional questions. Let's just say hypothetically that Joe Antifa showed up at the Capitol, upset that this president was doing away with his health care and causing him to spend more money at the grocery store and at the gas station because of the tariffs. And let's just say that Joe came up and he was so upset that he started bear spraying and pepper spraying and beating up members of the Capitol Police because he was so outraged. Would it be right to call Joe Antifa a patriot?
No, absolutely. He committed a crime.
And would it be right to arrest him?
Absolutely. And if I can just briefly say, this isn't a hypothetical. The Department of Justice was prosecuting protesters that turned into rioters from the summer of 2020, the very same 12-month period. And the analysis was, at least the initial analysis, was that those rioters actually received harsher sentences than those from January 6th.
That's right. And yet this president said that we assaulted the January 6ers, right, the insurrectionists, and that they were illegally detained, and in fact sort of presume that they didn't receive any due process. I'm so glad that you're sharing with us that it is not a hypothetical, that in fact it happened. And I just also want to share, Mr. Chair, that now we've learned that the Department of Justice is actually and actively deleting records of the January 6th cases, that they are scrubbing references to the January 6th insurrection as a riot, and in fact have fired prosecutors that worked on all of these cases. Would you agree to those statements?
Yes.
Thank you for the time.
Thank you very much. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Castro, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. And I want to say thank you to each of you for your courage and for your bravery and your candor today. I had the opportunity to serve as an impeachment manager to try to convict Donald Trump in the Senate, thanks to the appointment of, at the time, Speaker Nancy Pelosi. January 6th was an attempted coup. The mob that showed up was trying to stop Congress from doing its job of accepting the election results of the 2020 presidential election. And on that day, Donald Trump left everyone in this building for dead. Our brave police officers, elected officials of both parties, of course, but also our staff who work here in the House and the Senate, the journalists who covered this place, people that are not often discussed, like maintenance workers, cafeteria workers, all of the support staff in these buildings. Their lives were at stake as well.
And for 5 years, we've had to listen to Donald Trump and others whitewash that history and pretend as though it was a tourist visit or something peaceful. That day was a dangerous day, not just for the people in this building, but for our democracy and our country. So thank you, each of you, for the roles that you played. Thank you, Ms. Hemphill, for the grace that you've shown in accepting responsibility for what you did and also acknowledging the truth of that day and that mob. I wanted to ask you, Mr. Ballou and Ms. McCord, you know, we exist now in a time of social media where misinformation, lies, distortions can become accepted as truth, unlike any other time in human history. And Donald Trump has exploited that. And his hardcore supporters have exploited that. What work remains in making sure that this never happens again in the United States of America?
Thank you, Congressmember. You know, one of the problems is that social media and technology companies basically bear no responsibility when it comes to the way their platforms are misused, the way that their algorithms amplify extreme content. And people, unfortunately, many studies have shown if you do not yourself break out of that loop of more and more extremist content, you will just be kept feeding more and more. So I think one thing for Congress to take under consideration, and I know it's a very difficult task, is what to do about the Communications Decency Act.
Sure.
And I'll just add very briefly, I think, one of the best antidotes to that is the people who were at the Capitol that day speaking out. Obviously, members like yourselves, but the Capitol police officers, including Officers Dunn and Hodges, who are here today, I think have shown enormous personal courage.
Thank you. I'll yield back, Jim.
My name is Adam Villarreal. I was a January 6th defendant. And if I could respectfully ask, why is this committee only composed of Democrats? Why is
I'm glad you asked. Because no Republicans participated. You're not part of the thing. You're welcome to be here as a spectator. Thank you very much. Chair now recognizes young lady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank our leadership for convening us here in this basement room, crowded in here because I guess the Republican majority didn't want to see this in a bigger, more open space. As Jamie Raskin said in the beginning, it is still January 6th in America. And that is why we are here, to make sure that we continue to shine a light on the grievous errors of that day and those who perpetrated it, particularly Mr. Trump. I believe that his pardons on the very first day of his second administration was an attempt to pardon himself for all of history. Just wash it away. I didn't do anything wrong. It was a party and they were patriots. I want to tell you, Ms. Hemphill, Sophocles emphasized that to make a mistake is human, but real wisdom comes when you recognize your mistake and you correct it. You're an extraordinary role model. I think about you, you said you're a mom and a grandmom. What a role model you are for your grandchildren. To give them that sense of, I am human, I made a mistake, and I'm going to correct it publicly. That's hard to do privately in your own home. I know it. I'm human. I have a hard time admitting mistakes sometimes. I just want to tell you, your humility, your courage, I pray that it is contagious. May it take over this country, and I thank you for it. Ms. McCord, thank you for your clarity, your guidance. Keep speaking, keep guiding us, and together we're going to make a difference. Officer Pynchon, thank you so much for your work. How difficult was it for you to leave the service?
It was very difficult because I loved my job. I loved being an officer, and I'm so thankful for my years that I had here. I didn't leave only because of January 6th, but it did certainly play a factor. And I think quite possibly had January 6th not happened, I would still be an officer here today.
And I thank you and all the officers. We have seen the faces of so many of you, but every single officer needs to be recognized and thanked, whether they were on duty, off duty. I know so many of you, and you're great people. And finally, I too was here on January the 6th up in the gallery, and Mr. Ballou, I totally share with you the idea that symbols matter. I've actually met with the architect of the Capitol twice and asked that an installation be preserved for all of history. I recognize that's not going to be installed anytime soon under this administration or under this Speaker of the House who won't even put up a plaque. But I really call upon this House, the Capitol, the architect of the Capitol, and I actually wrote a letter and asked, what artifacts did you preserve? The broken glass, the shards, everything that you preserved. I never got an answer to that letter, but I call again. What do you think about that notion that we need to preserve this history?
It's absolutely the only way that this isn't going to happen again.
I thank you.
Thank you very much. Chair now recognize our last person, Ms. Ballant from Vermont.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witness for being here today. I'd like to most wholeheartedly thank Ms. Hemphill for your courage in speaking out. By being here today, you are showing more bravery than so many of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle that still refuse to admit what happened on January 6th. And I'm grateful that you're here. You talked in your opening statement about what you witnessed that day, about the violence. You said, nobody's going to gaslight me. I was there. I saw what happened. You talked about how you yourself were injured. And I just want to have you say it again. Who helped you when you were injured? Who helped you when you were feeling despair, Ms. Hemphill?
Thank you for the question. The Capitol Police. Wow. They grabbed my arm and they were all yelling to tell people to get off of me. And then another one came over and I was not breathing.
Yeah.
They pulled me up and they put me up on the steps, and another female officer came over and she was helping me, and I couldn't talk to her and I couldn't get up because I couldn't breathe. But she was so kind and so loving. And I thought, here, I'm one of the rioters.
Yeah.
So that's why I can't thank them enough for what they did for me that day.
So despite your actions, they were still there for you.
Yes.
It's extraordinary, isn't it?
It's amazing. They are amazing.
Yeah, they are.
They are.
And we're grateful for them every single day when we walk into this building.
Absolutely. And they deserve more than
they do. They deserve so much more than what they have been given by their government.
Yeah.
And I want to touch for a moment on the fact that you, by being here and by speaking out and by denying the pardon, you are showing everyday courage. And I keep coming back, and I just wrote it down again for myself. Mark Twain said, courage is resistance to fear. It's not mastery of fear. It's not absence of fear. And so you talked about your own fear, right? And coming forward, and that you've been doxxed and you've been harassed and you've been threatened. And yet you still stand so solidly in your conviction that what you did was wrong and that you want to speak out. You want to use this moment to right the wrong and to rewrite history. Can you just talk for a moment about how you found that courage? Because I want other people to find that courage.
I find that courage through a God that of my own understanding, because sometimes I don't have it. So I ask him to give me that courage, and he does.
Yeah.
He stands with me, in front of me, and beside me. But this was about the Capitol Police officers. There's something in me that I can't allow them to not be recognized and to be lied about for what they did for us on that day. How dare you? The Capitol Police and those that lost their life as a result bothers me to this day deeply. And until I can see that plaque get up there, I'm not done.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I see my time has expired. Again, thank you so much for being here. We can never forget. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady's time has expired. Once again, I'd like to thank our witnesses for appearing here today and thank the members for their excellent questions. I now excuse you as witnesses and invite our second panel of witnesses to take their seat.
And then so, are we rotating out or other people taking our seats? I think other people are gonna come in. I'm not gonna be here for the member panel. Are you going down there? I don't know. I'm gonna leave because I'm doing a whole bunch of press. Yeah.
Capital politics continuing coverage of the January 6th insurrection attack on the U.S. Capitol 5 years later. You've just heard the first panel of witnesses, former police officers, former Justice Department lawyer. Also, you saw a professor and one of the supporters of the former president or President Trump, who uh, acknowledge that she made mistake. That's Pam Hemphill. Um, the next panel, I think this will now include former Georgia Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, former Congresswoman Elaine Luria, I think is based on what I saw earlier, and former Representative Adam Kinzinger of Illinois is about to talk now to the panel or to be part of the witnesses panel to talk on this hearing of the January 6th committee. They're hearing or they're holding this hearing on the 5th anniversary of the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol or the attack at the U.S. Capitol. They're holding this hearing at the Capitol Visitor Center. You've just heard members of Congress. Let me when it was asked, the first question to those first panel is that if the January 6th was a normal tourist visit, all of them answered no. Officer Pigeon said that he knows, being a police officer, he knows what a normal tourist visit looks like. Also, Professor McCord has said that this was not a normal day of protest, and Miss Hemphill said she was there. Don't gaslight her, and don't tell her it was not violent. It is also asked to Miss Hemphill why she didn't accept the pardon given by the President Trump, in which she answered she made mistake. That's why she didn't accepted it. We're gonna pause for a moment. We'll be right back to this continuing coverage of the January 6th U.S. Capitol attack 5 years later, a Capitol Politics special. We'll be right back.
Capitol, urging his supporters to, quote, fight like hell. He had been feeding them lies for weeks, fomenting their rage, and at 2:11, all hell broke loose. A man had ripped away a police officer's riot shield and broke a window on the Senate side, becoming the first insurrectionist to breach the Capitol, and then they began to pour in. Vice President Pence was evacuated by the Secret Service, avoiding by mere seconds the insurrectionists, many of whom were calling for his execution. On the House side, Speaker Pelosi was pulled out by her detail as members of the mob roamed the halls of Congress yelling menacingly, "Where's Nancy?" Since it was a goal of the mob and Trump, it's a miracle that the vice president and no member of Congress were hurt or killed that day. However, the same cannot be said for the brave law enforcement officers that defended our Capitol on January 6th, and my thoughts are with them and their families, as the pain of this day surely has not faded for them in the past 5 years. In the months that followed, the House voted to form an independent 9/11 Commission-style group that would investigate these attacks, and that passed with bipartisan support in the House, only to be blocked by Senate Republicans. Speaker Pelosi decided then that the House would form its own select committee, and that resolution passed 222 to 190. I sit here today with several of my January 6th committee colleagues, including now Senator Adam Schiff, who had to step away, will be back in a minute, former Representative Elaine Luria of Virginia, and former Representative Adam Kinzinger of Illinois. Our work together was an intense, bipartisan, and collaborative effort. We were focused on getting the truth and then revealing the truth, and I think both our hearings and the final report succeeded in doing that. It was important to us that the information we obtained was accessible to every American, not some dense document filled with DC jargon, but a report where people could easily understand the magnitude of the January 6th attacks and what led up to that day. January 6th each year serves as a somber reminder of how fragile American democracy is and how close we came to losing it. This year is especially grim, as it is the first year in which insurrectionists are walking free thanks to President Trump's blanket pardons. The president, who purports to be, quote, pro-police and tough on crime, sent over 1,000 criminals free, many guilty of assaulting law enforcement officers, and it's absolutely shameful that President Trump chose on his very first day in office to turn his back on our men and women in uniform and excuse the violence that he incited and to send these criminals back out into the country to menace and hurt innocent Americans. Let me just have this one last thought. No matter how much President Trump and his allies seek to rewrite the past and cover up this stain on our history, the American people remember. With over 1 million documents and hundreds of hours of footage from our investigation, it is one of the most documented crimes in American history. And there's no doubt about who was the most culpable for that terrible tragedy. January 6th was about Trump illegally attempting to seize power, and as president, he continues to aggressively exercise power to the detriment of the American people. For example, his use of tariffs, which is hurting the pocketbooks of Americans all across the country. I think it's important that we see January 6th for what it is, an illegal effort to overturn the Constitution so Trump could have unlimited power. I'd now like to introduce the panel of my fellow January 6th committee colleagues. The Honorable Elaine Luria represented the southeastern Virginia in the House. Before she was a member of Congress. She served as a surface warfare officer in the Navy. She retired as the rank of commander. She is served with such distinction here in the Armed Services Committee and showed her patriotism not only as an officer in the Navy, but as a member of Congress and a member of our January 6th committee. I'm also happy to introduce former Representative Adam Kinzinger. He served in the Air Force as a pilot for 2 decades. He earned 6 Air Force medals before retiring at the rank of lieutenant colonel, and he showed his patriotism in this House by putting country over party and worked very hard as a member of the January 6th committee, and it's wonderful to see him again. And I'll introduce Adam Schiff, who I understand will be back in just a few minutes. Adam served in the House for many, many years. He served as the chair of the Intelligence Committee during the January 6th events, and he was respected so much for that service that he was elected California's junior senator and serves with distinction representing my constituents in the United States Senate. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Lofgren. I'll now recognize our witnesses for 5 minutes to provide summaries of their testimony. Their full written remarks will be submitted for the record. Representative Luria, you're recognized.
Thank you to Leader Jeffries, Representative Thompson, and my former colleagues from the Select Committee. I'm grateful to be back in the Capitol. But unfortunately, what brings us together today is the somber remembrance that 5 years ago, the Capitol and our democratic process were under attack by a mob summoned by President Donald Trump. As a retired naval officer who served 2 decades in uniform, I first took the oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, at the age of 17 when I entered the United States Naval Academy as a midshipman. And then again as a member of Congress, as we all do. My service has been to this country and to the Constitution. My focus this morning will be what the Select Committee exposed about Donald Trump's failure to uphold his oath, which states to the best of his ability to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, and his dereliction of duty as Commander-in-Chief, and furthermore, how this has persisted during his second term in office. President Trump's failure to act to end the violence that day, his rewriting and whitewashing of history, and his mass pardons of January 6 rioters, literally transforming hundreds of convicted and violent criminals into political martyrs and folk heroes, has served to undercut the rule of law and in turn weakened our democratic institutions. Veterans of our armed services know firsthand the leadership that is required in a time of crisis, urgent and decisive action that puts the country first. But on January 6th, when lives and our democracy hung in the balance, President Trump, as Commander-in-Chief, refused to act because of his selfish desire to stay in power. Think about what we saw on January 6th. Undeniable violence at the Capitol, the vice president being evacuated to safety by the Secret Service, senators running through the hallways to escape the mob, law enforcement valiantly defending the Capitol against brutal attack. As Commander-in-Chief, President Trump was oath and duty bound to protect the Capitol. But for over 3 hours, as Adam and I in our hearing described in detail, for 187 minutes, he disregarded the advice and pleas from his closest staff and his own family members to take action, to simply speak the words necessary to stop the violence and send the rioters home. And furthermore, when he spoke, he addressed those who instigated the violence with words of solidarity. He said, "I know your pain. I know you're hurt." He doubled down on the stolen election claims and then finally said, "I know how you feel, but go home and go in peace." President Trump also bears responsibility for the extreme delay in the D.C. National Guard arriving at the Capitol until after the violence had largely subsided. The DC National Guard is unique. It answers directly to the president. Senior Guard leaders have since testified that President Trump could have expedited the Guard's deployment with a single phone call. Instead, the Guard waited for hours, despite being positioned merely blocks away at the DC Armory. Rather than act, President Trump watched the chaos unfold on television from his private West Wing dining room. He made no call to deploy the Guard. Instead, he watched the attacks on Vice President Pence and justified the mob's "Hang Mike Pence" chants as common sense. The Guard arrived 3 hours and 19 minutes after being requested, well after the worst of the violence had already occurred. We'll never know how many law enforcement officers might have been spared their brutal injuries, or how many lives might have been saved had the commander-in-chief done his duty in the moment when it mattered the most. What we do know is that it was an outrageous dereliction of duty and a profound violation of President Trump's oath of office. President Trump has rescripted the norms of government service to require personal loyalty over loyalty to the Constitution. Our military leadership has resisted this and has held firm despite ever-increasing pressure. Yet President Trump continues to blur the lines between the duty of the military to the Constitution and his political aims. Days after losing the 2020 presidential election, President Trump fired Secretary of Defense Mark Esper for this very reason, insufficient personal loyalty. This was an extraordinary action by a lame duck president during a presidential transition that alarmed national security professionals on both sides of the aisle. Secretary Esper had resisted Trump's efforts to use the active duty military forces for domestic political purposes. He imposed invoking the Election Act to deploy troops to American streets during protests. He counseled against Trump's suggestions that troops should just shoot protesters. Since resuming office, President Trump has again politicized the armed forces, opening a baseless investigation into the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley. He and his administration purged senior military leadership and fired the service branch's top lawyers, simply deeming them roadblocks. He threatened to recall a sitting U.S. senator to active duty to be tried for claims of sedition under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. This is an extraordinary step to weaponize DOD against a member of the legislative branch. He has described fellow Americans as the enemy within, suggested the military straighten out American cities, and even proposed using American communities as military training grounds. These statements coincided with troop deployments to American cities over the objections of state and local leaders, and with a systematic effort to muzzle the Pentagon reporting by restricting press access to the Pentagon unless pre-approved by the administration. As someone who served in military and in uniform for 2 decades, I find this vision for our military deeply un-American. President Trump did not only attack this building and our democracy, he attacked the fundamental idea that the military serves the Constitution, not a man, not a party, and not a political agenda. This trend has only accelerated since his explicit display of dereliction of duty on January 6th, and should stand as a warning to all Americans that living in a free democracy is not self-executing. It depends on leaders and citizens choosing to uphold our values. We owe it to the law enforcement officers who defended the Capitol, those serving in uniform today, and the generations to come to lead that fight. And this is one that I will never abandon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Chair now recognizes Representative Kinzinger. You're recognized.
Well, thank you, Chairman Leader Jeffries. Thanks for having me. It's way different on this side, guys, let me tell you. I want to just briefly talk about the whole idea of this plaque. It's shocking to me, by the way, that has not been put up. Now, I am convinced that it will be put up at least by next January, and I'll humbly suggest maybe you can double the size of it by then. 5 years ago today, the president decided that America's legacy of transfer of power was beneath him. It was beneath him. And we all know what he did. He sent the mob to the Capitol and tried to rob the American people of their votes. He aimed to destroy America's self-determination and replace it with his own corrupt will. We've all seen the videos. We even saw them today. You know how vicious it was. No rational person can look at that violence that occurred on January 6th and think that it is not wrong. But even more concerning is that threats to our democracy have continued beyond what we've witnessed 5 years ago. And it's continued to today. The persisting threat to our nation lies in how Donald Trump and his allies have manufactured an alternate reality of conspiracies to support their violent siege of our democracy. It's simple. They want to rewrite history. By the way, we won't let them. These conspiracies started even before January 6th. The moment that Donald Trump realized that he could lose to Joe Biden, he began touting the big lie to undercut the public's trust in the election. And we all know that the thing that holds us together as Americans and the thing that allows us to self-govern is our belief that we can vote. If you're allowed to vote, the votes are counted and the winner wins. And when you violate that, you create real damage to the American people. When he began touting that big lie, he wanted us to believe that the election was stolen, that there was widespread voter fraud. This has been unequivocally disproven. It's been debunked by a series of independent agencies, Trump's own advisors, and more than 60 courts that did not rule in Trump's favor. And yet Donald Trump continues to spin. Trump even lied a few weeks ago when he told a little girl calling the White House on Christmas Eve that he had won Pennsylvania in 2020. He said he won Pennsylvania 3 times. It's a great thing to tell a kid that wants to know where Santa is. And his supporters follow suit, either knowingly pushing debunked conspiracy theories or still duped by the MAGA cult to spread ridiculous, widely disproven narratives whitewashing Trump's role and minimizing the attack. For example, his followers claim that Capitol Police opened the door to rioters, even though we have the footage of these officers being attacked and run down, with rioters literally stepping over injured officers to get inside. They claim that the January 6th attack was a sudden, unpredictable event. In reality, Trump sent rioters to the Capitol on January 6th, and we have the receipts showing that extremist right-wing groups planned the attacks for weeks beforehand. They also like to claim that the left-wing group Antifa, not Trump supporters, secretly orchestrated all the violence on January 6th. But we know it was groups like the Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, that started the violence on the 6th. DOJ's and FBI's own investigation debunked that wild theory. Many of my fellow Republicans even want to pretend that Donald Trump wasn't responsible for it and that he did not condone the violence on January 6th, even though we all can plainly see that it was Donald Trump who called on his supporters to march down Pennsylvania Avenue and fight like hell. It was Donald Trump who sat in the White House, as we discussed, for 187 minutes, watching the attack unfold, throwing gasoline on the flames with his 2:24 p.m. tweet targeting Vice President Pence in the middle of it. And since then, he's called January 6th defendants political prisoners and hostages. I want to point out here for a second that when these folks were arrested, they were contrite, as Ms. Hemphill was. And then the whole media organization of some of these came around and started calling them political prisoners. And when they did, they made them victims. And then that's when you saw the narrative change from they broke the law to they're victims. This is then in one of the first acts of the president's term, he immediately pardoned all of those people who took up arms for his wicked cause that day. I hear often, well, Adam, Trump only pardoned the innocent ones. He never pardoned cop beaters or real criminals. Well, that's obviously another false narrative. He didn't just pardon the nonviolent or non-dangerous people. He pardoned every single criminal who beat, kicked, punched, and pepper sprayed over 140 of our law enforcement officers. He pardoned every single criminal who helped drag a screaming officer into a crowd and said to shoot him with his own gun. I get asked frequently, why are you still going on about January 6th? Can't you just let it go? If our country had achieved real accountability and deterrence, we could move on. But we have not. A fact made clear by Donald Trump still spinning his conspiracies and his base still continuing to promote them. Donald Trump knows that these lies and stories only strengthen his power over the American people. How can I allow this without sharing what I know to be true, that on January 6th he tried to overthrow his government and call myself a patriot? How can I let that happen and call myself a patriot? How can we ever ensure that our votes matter if we bow to the narrative of a president who incites an insurrection, denies doing it, and then pardons the insurrectionists. The rewriting of January 6th is un-American. That's why we're here on this important day, to safeguard our democracy and call out corruption without fear of Donald Trump's persecution, so that a day like this may never stay in our country again. I also get asked a lot, what did the January 6th committee accomplish? And I'll tell you, we may have another few years. We have to continue to battle this misinformation. But I guarantee you that my kid and my grandkid and his grandkid will know the truth of what happened on that day. Because while the DOJ was not allowed to finish their investigation because the president knew exactly what they had, and he made them drop it. Because of that, the only living record was the January 6th committee, and I am proud of our work, and I yield back.
Thank you so much for your testimony today. Very powerful. You both have served this country in various ways before, during and after your service. Representative Loria, you've had a distinguished career in the U.S. Navy. Representative Kinzinger, you've served in the U.S. Air Force and National Guard. Given that record of service, what would you tell those who are in nonpartisan professional roles in the U.S. government right now?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. During my time in the military, I was never a very partisan person. And I think that, serving on a deployment, sailors operating nuclear reactors, for example, I didn't turn to them and say, are you a Democrat, are you a Republican? We're serving the country, we're serving the Constitution, we're carrying out a mission that's very important for the defense of our nation and preserving democracy. And I think for today, some people in uniform, it can be challenging to see the rhetoric that's surrounding this, to see the lies I cited in my remarks, the attacks on a sitting U.S. senator. It's chilling to say that someone who has simply said the words, only follow legal orders, is being persecuted, perhaps punished directly by DOD financially for saying those words. What about the sailor or soldier on the deck plates or in the field? What are they to do in this environment if they're given an illegal order? When someone with so many resources and such a powerful platform to speak and defend themselves is being attacked. So I find it very concerning, and along the themes of what I was trying to describe about how not only January 6th, but the follow-on to January 6th and how that has perpetuated through the second Trump administration has a very dangerous and chilling effect on our democracy and for our armed services.
And very well said. I agree 100%. I'll add one thing, which is just generally, to anybody out there that's working in a career position, it's in the military, whatever, is don't give up hope. Listen, this is all going to get better in a year and in 3 years, okay? Those are like different increments of how much better it's going to get, I believe. And someday we're going to look back, and 4 years is going to seem like nothing. I mean, we always know in history it seems like nothing. But we lose this fight for our country if we get discouraged and we get exhausted. In chaos, like the people that we're up against, they love chaos. This actually energizes them. It's like a shot of 5-hour energy drink. For us, it exhausts us. And so our battle is to stay engaged through the exhaustion. And so that's what I would encourage.
Thank you so much. Chair now recognizes for 3 minutes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Kamlaga Dove.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. I have to say, Representative Kinzinger, I've been rereading some of your interviews and your article on Substack, and I have to tell you that I'm not reading Republican, I am not reading Democrat, I am reading American. And so I thank you for that and for fighting against the brain rot. So you were on the Select Committee and you shared your experiences post January 6th. Can you sort of share with us what made you make the decision to put democracy over power or personal power or party?
Well, thank you. What made me do it is just simply my oath. I mean, what shocks me is that there were more people that didn't. I said this and I mean it. Like I'm not there. Nothing that I did was heroic, but I was just surrounded by a bunch of cowards that were too scared to do it. I mean, this is like, to me, it's the most basic thing. How do you defend your country? You have been, as a member of the House, God has basically, they have picked you to represent 700,000 people. What an honor that is. And you're going to sit there and say, my career is more important than this moment with 700,000 people? I wear the name of Andreas O'Keefe, who's a friend of mine that was killed in Iraq, on my wrist. And I said since the day I ran for Congress, I said, how can I, as a member of Congress, worry about my career if I'm going to vote for and eventually ask young people to go and die for their country? How can we ask a young person to die for their country if we are unwilling to give up our career for the same cause? That's how.
And so, thank you for that. And when you talk about cowardice and when you talk about leadership, what message is the speaker sending when he refuses to put up this plaque?
If I can say this just humbly, now that I'm out too, it makes it easier. Look, I'm a Christian. I have no reason to doubt that the speaker's a Christian. What I have a hard time seeing is how we can openly lie to 300 million people and say that's in line with our faith. Look, I'm not walking in his shoes. But the plaque is very simple. You don't have to say that Donald Trump won or lost 2020. All you have to say is DC Metro and Capitol Police did a hell of a job defending this Capitol that day. And had they not been there, and I can tell you, hand on the Bible, had they not been there, it would have been a very different and very bad day. So why the speaker can't do it? Because he's scared of people saying, oh my gosh, you put up a plaque. That's why I say double the size of it when you guys put it up.
I am running out of time, but I just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you for your voice and for your courage and for your commitment to this country. We must work and be as steadfast as possible in fighting against the rationalization, the socialization, and the legitimization of political violence and terror, and you are a warrior in that space. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, for 3 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Adam Kinzinger, you're a great American patriot. It was such an honor serving with you on the January 6th Select Committee under Chairman Thompson. You were the only member of the committee who flew himself to work, and there's always an air hangar for you in the Free State where you need a place to land. I wonder, you were, among other things, an officer in the Air National Guard. I wonder if you've had an opportunity to reflect on January 6th and the National Guard and what happened there. What was the standard set by Donald Trump on the threshold for activating the National Guard? Because he was unilaterally on top of the DC National Guard, so he could have sent it at any point and decided not to, even when you had thousands of people in a violent mob storming the Capitol, driving the members out of the House and the Senate. Is that a standard that you think he has maintained in his new administration in terms of deployments to places like Los Angeles and Chicago?
Look, it's interesting because I was an active guardsman during January 6th, and I remember the whole time, like, just where's the National Guard, right? My people. And I remember actually when I left after we reconvened and voted, I saw my first Guard soldiers, and that was very emotional for me. And in a good and bad way, it was good because it's like I'm proud of them. It was bad because, like, why, they're here. If you guys remember, after that day, my fellow Republicans tried this conspiracy theory that it was either Speaker Pelosi or the mayor of D.C. who was in charge of the D.C. National Guard. And I would get hit all the time saying, well, why didn't Speaker Pelosi or why didn't the mayor activate the National Guard? Well, easy, because they have no control over the National Guard. The commander-in-chief of the D.C. National Guard is not, there's no governor of D.C., it's the President of the United States, and by definition, the Secretary of the Army. And so it was clear. And ironically, 4 years later, the president is very proud to announce how in charge of the D.C. National Guard he in fact is. So all those conspiracies that we conveniently forget, yeah, he has a very different viewpoint now.
Yeah. Ms. Luria, it's wonderful to see you again, and thank you for joining us from Virginia. I wonder to what extent you think the work of the January 6th Select Committee, in terms of the hearings, the videos, the report, has been important in terms of the understanding of your constituents back in Virginia. Do you think that this is something that's actually made a difference in terms of developing an historical memory and consciousness of what happened?
Thank you, and it's great to be back with you and other members from our committee. I think it's been stated in several ways, and Adam mentioned it just a few minutes ago. It is the record that will exist for history and for posterity. Our children, our grandchildren, their children, they will know the history, they will know the truth as much in this moment in time, however brief it is in the big scheme of things, although it may feel long day to day. That will be recorded for history, that President Trump summoned a mob to the Capitol, which violently attacked police officers, caused deaths, threatened the functioning of our democracy, but it didn't succeed. And the myths that are being perpetuated today to keep it alive, they're not going to succeed either, because the history books that our grandchildren will study, and not only about the day of January 6th, but continuing to study the way that our government is continuing to function as an effective and fair democracy, will prove that the work we did on January 6th was important.
Yield back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've been joined by Senator Schiff. We've been anxiously awaiting your testimony. Senator Schiff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 5 years ago, in the aftermath of January 6th and the attack on the Capitol, the Select Committee documented in painstaking detail how our democracy held, just barely, in large part thanks to a critical mass of honorable officials who withstood President Trump's pressure campaign to subvert the law and overturn the election results. People like Brad Raffensperger, Gabriel Sterling, Rusty Bowers, Ruby Freeman, and Shay Moss, among many others, who, as the Select Committee documented, faced extraordinary pressure to betray their oaths and to overturn the will of the voters. They never bent or yielded, and their names will be etched in history. The Select Committee's final report detailed how President Trump pressured, for example, Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger in that now infamous phone call demanding that he find 11,780 votes. As Raffensperger told the committee, I felt then, and I still believe today, that this was a threat. When Raffensperger refused, the president and his allies turned their ire on election workers like Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, subjecting them to threats and harassment that upended their lives. The committee's report documents at least 200 acts of pressure by President Trump targeting state and local officials through meetings, phone calls, text messages, as well as social media campaigns. Then Arizona Speaker Rusty Bowers testified to the committee that when asked by President Trump and Rudy Giuliani to overturn Arizona's results, he told them directly, "You are asking me to do something against my oath, and I will not break my oath." Officials in Michigan and Pennsylvania received the same phone calls from President Trump telling them to have some backbone and do the right thing. What allowed these officials to hold the line in 2020? Courage, yes. Patriotism, without question. Dedication to duty, without a doubt. But they also had federal partners willing to follow the law. They had the Cyber Security and Infrastructure Security Agency providing critical election security support. They had federal courts, including judges appointed by President Trump himself, reject baseless claims and uphold the rule of law. Even Attorney General Bill Barr, who crossed many lines on behalf of the president, nevertheless testified before the committee, "I repeatedly told the president in no uncertain terms that I did not see evidence of fraud. You know, that would have affected the outcome of the election." Today, however, the landscape has fundamentally changed. The election officials who stood strong in 2020 are being systematically purged, and the guardrails to protect the integrity of our elections are being taken down brick by brick. By Donald Trump, by his enablers, by those willing to look the other way for the sake of political expediency. This administration is working methodically to ensure that when the next test comes, there will be few, if any, left to resist. First, they've eliminated the federal support system.
They've ended all election security work at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. They fired employees who worked on election-related programs. They've ceased funding the Election Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center, the very organization that helped state and local officials respond to cyber attacks on election systems. Second, they've replaced trusted public servants with loyalists. Attorney General Pam Bondi and the President's former personal lawyers are now in leadership positions at the Justice Department, and they have proved themselves more than willing to adopt and disseminate conspiracy theories about the 2020 election. An attorney who worked alongside the architects of the fake elector scheme now represents DOJ in its Fulton County litigation. Another who tried to throw out 200,000 ballots in Wisconsin now works at the DOJ Civil Rights Division. Trump's Justice Department has even fired or demoted career prosecutors and investigators who are doing their jobs by holding violent attackers accountable. Third, they're creating legal pretexts for future subversion. In March 2025, the President issued an executive order that purports to establish documentary proof of citizenship requirements for voter registration, to decertify voting machines used throughout the country, and to restrict election funding to states that allow post-election day receipt of ballots. While federal courts have stopped parts of this order, it serves to sow confusion and provide cause to refuse to certify future election results. How, the President may ask in November, can we trust the results from an election run on voting machines that he previously sought to decertify? And fourth, they're weaponizing DOJ to intimidate voters and local officials. The department has filed lawsuits against 18 states, largely those with Democratic majorities, seeking complete unredacted voter rolls with Americans' personal identifying information. It's easy to see the script they could deploy to call into question future election outcomes without any basis in fact. They could claim, for example, the Department of Justice cannot confirm that X state's elections were free of voter fraud because they refused to share voter information with the federal government. And perhaps most ominously, we've seen the President's efforts to coerce Colorado into releasing Tina Peters, a county clerk convicted of serious state-level election-related crimes, including going so far as to veto a bill unanimously passed by both chambers of Congress that delivers clean drinking water to rural Coloradans. In doing so, President Trump continues to signal to election administrators nationwide that if they commit crimes on his behalf, they will have the full support of the office of the president and, if needed, a pardon. As a result, we're seeing massive turnover among election workers since 2020. Many who stood firm have been pushed out, harassed, and driven out by threats. They're now being replaced by individuals who may be more than willing to bend or break the law when pressure comes. As the Select Committee warned in its findings, the greatest threat to democracy comes from those in positions of power who are willing to subvert the rule of law. That is exactly what this administration is trying to engineer. Despite the challenges facing our democracy, we can and must ensure a free and fair election this fall and far into the future. As the Select Committee concluded in its report, had enough state officials gone along with President Trump's plot, his attempt to stay in power might have worked. It is fortunate that a critical mass of honorable officials withstood President Trump's pressure to participate in this scheme. These brave individuals proved that standing firm in defense of democracy is possible even under extraordinary pressure. We must prepare to do so again. I thank you.
I thank the gentleman for his testimony. We will now hear from our last questioner, the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean.
Thank you, Chairman. And I thank Representative Loria, Representative Kinzinger, and Senator Schiff, colleagues and friends, for your testimony, for your work on the Select Committee. That work will last for all of history, and I thank you for it. I went to every single one of the meetings that I possibly could. And Adam, to your point, to hear from the brave Americans who put themselves at risk, not just representatives, but the brave Americans who had the courage to tell the truth about what had happened and the pressures that they had been under, whether they were in the administration or outside the administration. Elaine, you started with the notion of oath and duty. Actually, I think all of you spoke to that issue. It is so clear that, as Jack Smith's testimony reveals, the president, after a series of lies, the lies that continue to this day, he invited the mob, he incited the mob, and then he exploited the mob as he continued the series of lies to millions of Americans. And I remember I had the solemn honor, probably the highest honor I will ever serve here as a member of Congress. I was asked by Speaker Pelosi to be an impeachment manager for the second impeachment of Donald Trump, serving alongside so many of the folks here. And I remember people saying, well, wait a second, he couldn't have foreseen that that could have happened. Well, of course, he could foresee, and the folks around him could foresee. But the 187-minute delay sitting in the dining room, are you kidding me? Representative Swalwell asked about a comparison to another president acting in such a way. Could you imagine another president waiting 5 minutes when his vice president, members of the House and Senate were under such a critical attack? And I guess I want to just ask you each quickly. I agree with you. We're going to face the same problem again. And maybe, Mr. Kinzinger, you could help us the most. Most people say to me, why is it only Adam Kinzinger and few others? When will they part company with this man of lies and corruption? Can you give us any understanding of that?
I mean, when it's been 10 years of him around and you invest so much of yourself in helping to advance the lie, you now take ownership of it if you admit that's what it is. And humans are unbelievably capable of convincing ourselves of anything. And keep in mind the first term of Donald Trump, there are a lot of your colleagues, my colleagues, that either didn't run again, they were beat or whatever for speaking out. And so after 10 years, the only folks left are those that are very willing to bow down and to offer everything to the great Donald Trump. And I tell you, when it ends is in 3 years when he's out of office. And all of a sudden, and potentially what happens here. Power is the one thing that can wake them up. And so they're going to lose it, and it's going to be a pretty bad day for them when they do.
Thank you all for your extraordinary service to our country. I yield back.
Thank you so much. Senator, you'd like to comment on that?
I would. One of the issues that we looked at as part of the January 6th committee, but it was also larger than the scope of what we could effectively wrap our heads around, is the challenge of where Americans now get their information and how we get it from such very different places. And I think in answer to your question, not just about this president, but about so much of what divides the country, we're going to have to figure out a way of becoming better consumers of information, or breaking down some of the stovepipes again, because we each live in such different information worlds. I'm old enough to have rushed back to my college dormitory to watch Walter Cronkite's last broadcast, and that was a time when there was a large body of agreed upon fact, and we might differ with what to do with those facts, but at least we agreed there were facts. Now people tune into the news they want to hear to reinforce the views they already have, or they have it curated for them on social media that shows them only what they want to see because it rewards time on their platform. This, to me, is one of the most cross-cutting challenges we have. And I think in order to avoid this kind of ability to gaslight a significant part of the country by claiming you cannot believe your lying eyes, you can't believe what you're hearing, you can only believe me, we're going to have to find a way to break through those information silos. And I think this disruption we've had in how we get information is every bit as seismic as the invention of the printing press must have been. But civilization had centuries to get used to that innovation and not a few wars. We've had a relative millisecond to get used to this media environment, and we're going to have to figure this out. But Chairman, I thank you for hosting this hearing along with Leader Jeffries. Thank you, Chairman, for your service, and to Adam and Elaine, my colleagues. Very grateful for your work. Was very proud to serve with you on the January 6th committee. And Adam, thank you for your continued courage and willingness to speak out.
And I want to thank our colleagues for appearing here today. And I'll now excuse you and invite our next panel of witnesses to take their seat.
Special coverage of the January 6th U.S. Capitol attack 5 years later. We just heard the testimonies from uh, former Representatives Elaine Luria and Adam Kinzinger, as well as Congress Senator Adam Schiff of California. Now, the third panel witnesses is about to speak. We'll see who will speak or who will now talk in the panel. All right.
Our first speaker has the magic minute.
That's why I wore the pin today, to get that magic minute. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your leadership. You and Liz Cheney did such a remarkable job leading this, the committee, and now the leadership of our leadership, Hakeem Jeffries, Pete Aguilar, who's there, and others, Congresswoman Clark as well. Thank you for bringing us together today. On January 6th, 5 years ago, we began the day prayerfully. We had a Zoom call with our members because it was the time of COVID. And on that call, I said, this is the Feast of the Epiphany. This is an important Christian feast, and let us hope that that word epiphany, which means we also not only a feast of the Epiphany, but the idea of the Epiphany, that people will see the light in a different way. We were prepared that day under the leadership of Jamie Raskin. He had prepared us in advance to go to the floor very, very legally. It was about the facts and it was about the law. And it was very nonpartisan. In fact, all of our testimony was based on Republican testimony throughout the states that would be in question. We prayed for the president. We said we weren't going to mention his name in our testimonies of facts and the law, the numbers and the races. And I continue to pray for the president because I could never have had the idea that a president of the United States would incite an insurrection on the Capitol of the United States, this symbol of democracy throughout the world, on the Constitution of the United States, which he took, and we all took an oath to uphold, on the Congress of the United States, who that day had the congressional responsibility to accept the results, to certify the results of the election. The list goes on. And today, that president who incited that insurrection continues to lie about what happened that day. On my way over here, I saw on TV that he was claiming that we did not ask for the National Guard. I thank Representative Kinzinger and as well as Elaine Luria for setting the record straight and other testimony that you have heard here. For over 3 hours, we begged him to send the National Guard. He never did it. He took joy in not doing it, was savoring that. And right now, he was saying on TV today, I wanted to send it, they just wouldn't do it. His own Secretary of Defense, acting Secretary of Defense, testified under oath against what the president is saying today. Maybe not in public, but under oath. God forbid that they ever put this president under oath. His people know never to do that because who knows what will happen. But what he's saying today, still lying about it, is an insult to the American people. Good thinking people in our country, and I believe in the goodness of the American people. Believing in their goodness is what gives us hope that we can move on from this even stronger. His lies that he continues to tell are an insult. The courage of our founders, the beautiful vision they had of this country. And they wrote the Constitution. Thank God they made it amendable so that we could expand freedom over time. But in that Constitution, they knew that we could have a rogue president. Hence, they put impeachment there. But they never suspected that at the same time we'd have a rogue United States Senate, wouldn't have the courage to testify to the truth. However, Senator Mitch McConnell, the leader of the Senate at that time, joined us in calling for the National Guard. Get it over here right away. He used a little slight profanity in what he said, and yet he refused to vote for the impeachment. But nonetheless, getting back to this actual date, because of Sergeant Aguilo Canal, Harry Dunn, Eugene Goodman, Michael Fanone, Daniel Hodgins, Caroline Edwards, because of the actions of these members of Congress and their courage, and I name just a few, but because of the National Guard, our members of Congress were protected. And some of them are here, and I see so many more who will testify. We all know the leadership that was provided by one of our colleagues who will testify, and he told them to take off their pins because these people were coming to get us. How many times did I hear they were going to put a bullet in my F-word head? That's what I heard on TV while we were seeing this on TV. But one thing I knew when we saw that on TV was, despite what anybody would say, that we would go to the floor that night and show the world that the Congress of the United States, that our democracy had survived the insurrection that the United States president had incited. And I want to especially thank the mother, Gladys, and son Kenny, in attendance of Officer Brian Sicknick. Officer Jeffy Smith, his widow Erin, is in attendance, and also Officer Howard Livingood's family, Officer Kyle DeFreytag, and Officer Gunnar Hashida. These families made the supreme sacrifice for our democracy. And that day, what particularly offended me was, we know that our founders, the Times have found us, right, Mr.? The Times found our founders to establish this country. The Times found Lincoln to save the Union. The Times found us to save our democracy as well. But when we were watching this on TV, we could see the Confederate flag being flown under Lincoln's dome, the dome that Lincoln built during the Civil War to show the world that America was resilient. Lincoln's dome, there's the Confederate flag, while they were defecating on the floor of the Capitol, insulting the people who managed the Capitol, the staff, and all the rest. But it was the courage of our national police and also the Metropolitan Police that saved our lives. It was the courage of our members to go back to the floor that night. I was so proud of them because you never know in terms of whatever is happening in the White House. Still, it took courage to go back to that floor. Still, when we went back to the floor to continue the work of the Constitution, the Republican members decided to still challenge the results of the election. that it wasn't honest. I mean, the lies were so pervasive. They were so sad. They were so sick. It's almost if you drum up something from the past. Have you no decency? Do you not care about your oath of office? Is your loyalty to that man who incited an insurrection more than your oath of office? Is your political career more important than America to you? Why are you here? Why are you here? So again, I want to just say that with all of this, one of the proudest moments of my 8 years of speaker and 12 other years as leader, but the speaker part was that we went to the floor and we honored our members, had the courage to go there after being under threat, being chased by these people, being under threat to go to the floor to honor their oaths of office. Again, there's one thing, I mean, we're not going to forget, and this committee, the January 6th committee, thank you all for your service in that regard, because there is the record. Think what would have been if we didn't even have that. The public would not even know the destruction of it. The president's always saying to me, well, you weren't ready. I wasn't ready for a president of the United States. Yeah, I wasn't ready for a president of the United States to incite an insurrection against the Congress of the United States, against the Constitution, against the Capitol of the United States. No, who would be ready for that? But we are ready to save our democracy. The times have found us to do that. And again, much to his dismay, we went to the floor that night in the House and in the Senate to honor our oath and to certify the results of the Electoral College. But the one thing that I'll never forgive them for is the trauma that they've created in the lives of our members and their families who are seeing this, and the staff. When we came back from the undisclosed location, where they wanted us to stay, so you stay there in a couple of days, you can do that. No, we're going now, and we're going to the Capitol, and we're not staying in any undisclosed location, and we're not doing that. Forget that. So when we went in and saw the staff are these young people who are idealistic, who come to Washington, Democrats and Republicans, come here to be part of what's happening and what will happen for the future. And to see the trauma in their eyes because of this inciter of an insurrection and these people who followed him. Again, one of them having a shirt, Auschwitz, 6 million were not enough, for example, of some of the people who were there. So, again, I thank you for the magic minute. Again, I have so much, there was so much going on there. But what was going on there is in a bipartisan way, we were asking the President of the United States again and again and again. When we had the Department of Defense on the phone, we said, pretend this was the Pentagon, and they were doing this at the Pentagon. What would you do? What would you do? But this president continues to lie about that fact. And that fact is important because it costs lives. It caused trauma. It sent the wrong message to the world about what democracy is. It was something that made Putin proud. See, democracy doesn't really work because of this president of the United States. An insult to the institution in which he serves, an insult to the founders of our country, an insult to the intelligence of the American people. I yield back.
All right, we will now gonna pause here to conclude our special coverage of the fifth year anniversary of the January 6th U.S. Capitol attack. Now speaking on the hearing is Congresswoman Robin Kelly of Illinois. The first panel featured testimonies from Pham Hemphill, Officer Winston Pynchon, former Justice Department lawyer Brendan Ballou, and Professor Mary McCord. The second panel included former Representatives Elaine Luria and Adam Kinzinger, along with Senator Adam Schiff, offering insights into the challenges posed by the attack. While we're ending our live coverage for now, the hearing will continue with the third panel. That panel began with former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and now speaking is Congresswoman Robin Kelly. Also up next is Congresswoman Terry Sewell and Congressman Jason Crow. As we reflect on the hearing so far, the personal stories and professional observations remind us of the human impact of January 6th, as well as the importance of safeguarding democratic institutions. The testimonies offered insights into the courage and dedication of law enforcement officers, public servants, and ordinary Americans. As the hearing continues with additional panels, these voices serve as a reminder that history is shaped not only by the events themselves, but by the action and reflections of those who experienced them firsthand. The events of January 6, 2021 underscored the fragility of democratic institutions and the critical importance of protecting them. By learning from the challenges of that day, society can reaffirm its commitment to transparency, accountability, and peaceful transfer of power, safeguarding the principles that are central to the nation's democratic foundation. We will always remember the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. Always, it will be never ever forgotten. This has been the Capital Politics Special Report. I'm Ethan Vargas. Thank you for joining us. Have a good afternoon.